Tacario Davis is questionable for the Apple Cup. That could be a big concern for Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you know when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today. We're going to talk about some crucial edge targets that are still out there in the 2026 class, because it's just going to continue on a conversation from yesterday where we were talking about some UCLA decommits. So we'll talk about one name you already know and a new one. We're going to talk about, just speaking of defensive line, why Washington's pass rush needs to thrive in the Apple Cup, no matter who's playing quarterback. But we're going to start on the injury front. Omari Evans is set to return, which is great. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the big concern is Tacario Davis. After going down following an interception in the UC Davis game and not returning, Jedd Fisch said he is questionable for this upcoming game.
The question is, how many snaps is he going to play? I think at the end of the day, Tacario does suit up and play because you kind of need him to when you talk about who's going to step up in that position if he doesn't. And I think, to me, if you get a big enough lead in the first half, and big enough could be 14 or 17 points from what we saw in that North Texas game against Wazoo, you really don't need that much here. So I think if you can get ahead enough, then you can see how good Leroy can be behind him, or maybe Rashawn Clark, Elias Johnson maybe gets in that mix. Who knows? But I think you still have him find a way to start the game, maybe do a trade-off. Leroy gets a couple snaps every other drive sort of thing. But at least for, now going into where we're talking about this on Monday, yeah, I think Tacario still plays. The question is just how many snaps.
So I like where you're going that, because with me, one thing, we're not going to speculate on what the actual injury is, where Jedd Fisch didn't disclose anything, so we're not going to sit here and speculate. I do think it's a pain management sort of thing more than this is a serious long-term deal, because Jedd Fisch said he's probably going to be considered day-to-day for a while. So I do agree where, as of right now, he's probably going to wind up playing, in my mind at least. And even if he doesn't, it's one of those things where you would certainly rather have him be healthy for Ohio State. And as you said, see what you have in Leroy Bryant, in Rashawn Clark, if you want to move him outside, in Dylan Robinson, who I think would see a big uptick in snaps if he were to have to be held out for a game. And so with a guy like Tacario, I think the thing that's most important right now, and it kind of lends into, just to talk about recruiting here for a second, why we've seen Washington just hammer home the point of grabbing 6 defensive backs in the class of 2026. It's for reasons like this, where after Tacario and Ephesians graduate, the room is not just thin, but it's young and inexperienced. So you want to just find some depth. And I feel like this might be a spot where in January now, you go out and you find a cornerback in the transfer portal to come and help contribute for a year on the outside. I think that this injury just kind of exposes that this is quietly one of the thinner positions on the team. And I think that all the guys you have in the room are very talented. There's a lot of upside there, but there just isn't a lot of experience behind these 2 starters. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out. And it's one of those things where if Leroy Bryant does need to see a big uptick in snaps, if you want to see what Dylan Robinson has, great, and you are able to establish a big enough lead and get something out of Tacario, that's awesome. And you can pull him early, a lot like you did against UC Davis, and just go from there. But I don't think this is anything to be concerned about long-term, but if he doesn't play, I will be a little bit worried about what that might look like, at least early on in the game.
Exactly. I think that's why he started. It's even going to hammer home the point here that you just made perfectly. The gap between Tacario Davis and Leroy Bryant in outside corner snaps, according to PFF, what do you think that gap looks like in terms of numbers?
Oh, just this season or career-wise?
No, just this season.
Oh, I would say it's probably 60-something snaps.
Close. I was going to say, so they credited Tacario with 60 and Leroy Bryant with 17. So there is a major league gulf there between the two, and Leroy's the next highest guy with the corner snap count with 17. And to me, I think I probably should have thought about Dylan Robinson a little bit more there, because I think this could be a prime game where once you get Tacario some snaps, maybe you force a 3 and out, get a turnover or whatever, and you get, let's say, a 24-10 lead at halftime, or a 35-10 lead at halftime. Tacario has no business playing in the second half. And I think you're more than okay with that, because you saw, hey, cool, he's able to go, he's able to be healthy, he didn't risk anything, but you still need him out there, because as much as we like Dylan Robinson, does he start against Wazoo? Like, how do you feel going into Saturday? You and me are on the sidelines at that game. Let's just say, like, watching him warm up, how confident are you that UW could still win comfortably in that game?
I would still feel very comfortable just based on the overall defense. But again, this is where I would have some level of concern. And it's not that Dylan is not an extremely talented player who I think has a very bright future here at Washington. I think it's just more of, okay, all of a sudden you can just identify that's certainly where they're going to pick on. And we saw Dylan have his moments in fall camp as camp progressed, where early on it was certainly still just a lot of not just getting a hang of the college level, but getting the hang of playing corner full time after playing a whole lot of wide receiver at the high school level. So I hear your question, and I think you're 100% right about that. I just want to make very clear that I think that it's not necessarily so much lower. I think it's more of, let's say you see that not necessarily against Ohio State, because that's an extreme example. Let's say you see that against Maryland in a couple of weeks. And it's, I feel like all of a sudden you're having a very different conversation. That's a game I feel like Washington should go in as a very heavy favorite. But all of a sudden, if you're starting a true freshman at outside corner, I think that is where things sort of change, and where if you do need to manage his load here for a couple of weeks, or just leading up to the Ohio State game, because you're going to need him at full strength for that. I think that that's probably what the smart move would be for this coaching staff.
I agree with that assessment. It's just a matter of how much do you trust him? How much do you want to risk Tacario in a game that you should win? I think like with or without Tacario, you should still beat Wazoo, probably cover the spread, because you still have enough, and we'll get to in the second segment, but just you have enough, like you said, around the rest of the defense, linebackers, Alex McLaughlin, McEllisteen, there's enough there to make it work, but you still don't want to risk that, knowing, again, a rivalry game, anything can happen. So you start a true freshman plus Ephesians, maybe it's a little bit different.
So before we move on here, let's talk about Omari Evans here for a sec, because Jedd Fisch said he practiced in full on Sunday and he fully expects him to play this weekend, barring a setback. And it's something where you go look at the depth chart. I was stunned for the first time in Jedd Fisch's tenure. He changed the depth chart during the season and had both Kevin Green Jr. and Desmond Roebuck listed as or starting wide receivers. And this is something where Jed kind of tipped his hand last week and said that as of right now, Desmond Roebuck would be that third starter. And I think that with Omari, he just adds such a different element to this offense. No matter what, we're going to see all three of those along with Raiden Weisbrach, along with Denzel Boston. All of those guys are certainly going to be in the mix in this game. I think that having Omari, though, just adds such a different level to this offense, because he gives you that downfield speed. He gives you so many different things to do to open things up underneath for whoever that might be. Desmond Roebuck, Raiden Weisbrach, Denzel Boston, whoever is running just some kind of drag route, something over the middle. All of a sudden, there's just so much more space when you know there's a guy with, legit 4.3, 4.4 speed that can take the top off the defense.
A guy who knows how to do a job. Where Desmond Roebuck is showing he knows how to do a job, but he's still a freshman. Kevin Cummings and Jedd Fisch can just look out and say, Omari, you've been in college for 4+ years. You know what you're doing out there. So whether you're, fully ingrained in the offense yet or not, we can at least trust that you're going to run the correct route. Whereas last season, I think with Jeremiah Hunter, there was a couple of discrepancies in terms of, did he run the right route, make the right break? All you're doing is looking for Omari to be either a decoy or kind of just an option. Where Desmond, and the reason why, to your point about Desmond being included in the two deeps, second highest targeted receiver on the team behind Denzel Boston. So like Jed, to be fair, he loves the gamesmanship and all this, but he also loves to have the salesmanship of, hey, look how many freshmen we had in the two deeps, because I guarantee you next year he's going to say, hey, we had 12 freshmen in there. I'm just throwing out a number here in the two deeps, and those sorts of things. And it's always the one game here, one game there. Puka getting the start at BYU and only getting a catch or two. Like, again, it's symbolic in some ways, but it's also earned from Desmond's case. And I think, again, you just need all the options out there. And that's why Omari, being back kind of just gives you another veteran presence opposite Denzel.
Speaking of having all the options out there, you need to see that along the defensive line. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, easy, and honestly my favorite way to follow along with football. And the best part, even if one of your picks misses, Prize Picks invented the flex play so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. As we look at this defensive line, the everydayers know, on last week's show, we talked about the return of Deshaun Lynch for this game, the return of Logan Sagapolu. Jed Fish said they're still monitoring the status of Javon Parker. I don't expect to see him in this game. But as we just kind of look at where this unit is right now, as we continue to move forward, I think there's a lot to be excited about with the defensive line because of what the sheer volume of this unit just provides. And if you look at Washington State, through their first 3 games, they've only allowed 4 sacks, but this is certainly a step up in the level of competition that this offensive line is going to see. And if we see the same 5 down front look and we see Ryan Walters want to bring constant pressure against whoever's playing quarterback, because as Jimmy Rogers said, there's a 3-way battle for the starting quarterback job this week, whoever that might be. I feel like after we saw the amount of turnovers that we did last week from this Wazoo offense, 5 being the number, just a quick reminder, I think that finding a way to overwhelm whoever's playing quarterback is going to be one of the best ways to not only take pressure off the secondary if Tacario Davis can't go or is limited in any way, but it's just also something that you need to continue to show going into Big Ten play.
It's the epitome of what we've been talking about, where UW doesn't have the A1 guy, and that's no slight to Zach Durfee here. I'm just, being honest. Like, they don't have that premium first-round pass rusher, but you have strength in numbers. You have strength in position versatility, where Anterio Thompson, Uiagalelei, Jacob Lane. Jacob Lane leads the team in 6 total pressures. Anterio's the next with 4. Isaiah Ward also has 4. You have so many different bodies that you can accept, hey, we're just going to throw a number of different looks at you and just see what ends up working. And like you mentioned, like Jaxon Potter, okay, like I think Zevi Eckhaus probably is actually more of a dynamic threat in that regard. So if I would almost be like, if I'm Jimmy Rogers, I'm probably starting Zevi just because he gives you the most chance to survive. But I think whichever quarterback Wazoo ends up going with, I don't think it's going to matter. I mean, I think at the end of the day, UW has the better talent up front. The only difference is, can you let that talent shine through? Because Ty has been, he's a senior, been around. Anterio, this is a game where we've been talking about Anterio since he got here, in January, February, somewhere in that range. This could be his game to pop off, where if he doubles his pressure total, like I wouldn't be surprised, just because when you look at that line, 4 sacks, but like, can you name an offensive lineman at Wazoo right now?
I certainly can't, which also just speaks to we need to do better research for that. But no, but your point is very fair. I look at that and I just, one of the things that I say with that is it doesn't just start on the interior. It's just, this is a collective effort, and it always has been, because you can look at Jacob Lane, Isaiah Ward, as just all these other guys, Bryce Butler, Arlenius Davis, all these other guys that will rotate in and do some level of contributing in this game, whether it's 5, 10, 15 snaps, or they want to give somebody 25, 30 plus, like whatever that might be. That's where you look at what this Washington defensive line is and just needs to be to find success this season. It doesn't start with one guy. It is this continual, just overwhelming of an offensive line. And I think that you bring up a fair point with Zevi Eckhaus, because when you do look at just how Washington attacked a mobile quarterback a couple of weeks ago in Caden Pinnock, I know it's very different, in terms of what the talent level is, even though a lot of these guys are coming from the FCS level with Jimmy Rogers from South Dakota State. I think that when you look at what, how Washington decided to try to keep Caden Pinnock in the pocket, they hit him early, and you could tell that everything just sped up for him, and it was a problem. If you were able to do that again in this game, that just throws everything off. And that's why, on yesterday's show, again, as David Dares know, we were talking so much about finding ways to create turnovers in this game. It will all start up front with this group, because Jacob Lane showed that, I got in the backfield on the first play of the game and I brought down Caden Pinnock. And from that point on, he really looked like he started to panic. And I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen to Zevi Eckhaus or Jaxon Potter or whoever does start for Wazoo this week. But I just think that it's something where we saw just a great plan of attack up front, keeping a guy like Caden Pinnock in the pocket. And if you're able to continue to do that with the coverage you're going to see in the secondary, with or without Tacario Davis, I think Leroy Bryant is certainly a more than serviceable option at outside corner. But you just look at how this defense is set up. If it is Jaxon Potter, who does prefer to stand in the pocket and just deliver the ball downfield, whoever it might be, if you're able to just continue to collapse the pocket, you will find ways to have success because you're just sending so much pressure. Where we're going to look back on it at the end of the season, and if Ryan Walters has the highest blitz rate in the Big Ten of just sending 5 or more guys, I'm not going to be shocked. And this game is going to be one of those big reasons why, because if you can force an already turnover-prone offense into making more mistakes, that's just going to help you out in the long run.
And I think within that, you're forcing someone to be one-dimensional. And what Wazoo can't do, just looking at some of these PFF grades and some things that I've been noticing, speaking of research here, is just that they don't really have that much efficiency running the ball. So if you can force them to be one-dimensional, which we both believe UW can be, and you're going to have to force them to throw, that just feeds into UW's favor, where ironically the strength in Wazoo's offensive line is in the middle. So I think that's why when you look at the tackle, like Jacob Lane should eat. Tai, if he plays a little more outside, should eat. Isaiah Ward should eat. Like Durfee should eat. Like all these guys, you have enough out there to collapse the pocket like you're talking about, but it's a matter of asserting your will as a Big Ten team against a former Pac-12. I guess they're still the Pac-12, whatever. But with that being basically a bona fide Mountain West team at this point, that level of competition, what we saw against Colorado State, where UW, what was it, 14-14 at halftime? Like, you early season jitters, late game, whatever you want to call it. This is the game where in a similar level of competition, let's just call it what it is with Colorado State and Wazoo, you should be able to assert your will in both the run and the pass to force Zevi or Jaxon Potter to be have to throw. And that's when you pin your ears back and you get after him. And I would like to see the Oregon game come out in Washington this weekend, where you have, I'm not saying 10 sacks is what we should expect here, but why not? Like, you have all the bodies to do it. It's just, and you, by the way, got the perfect coach with Ryan Walters. Like,
sure,
this is when it should all come to fruition.
No, exactly. And one thing I want to just kind of circle back to is where you say it starts in the middle, where great if that's the strength of Wazoo's offensive line, but that's also one thing that you are trying to turn into a strength of Washington. And like I said, it doesn't seem like Javon Parker is going to play in this game. It feels like that return is still somewhat of a ways away. But no matter what, you are building this defensive line to compete in the Big Ten. And while you and I believe that might be middle of the road this season, if you're able to still take a step forward because the scheme is giving you opportunities to win in these one-on-one matchups, like we've heard throughout the offseason from all of these guys, that starts in a game like this, where it's still, when, again, by technicality, the toughest opponent you've faced in terms of whatever you want to call it, conference, just talent metrics, whatever that might be. This is still probably the toughest of the 3 opponents that you're going to face. And I think it's something where you still need to, again, like you said, find a way to establish your will. And it's all going to start on the defensive line, where we know what this offensive line is going to bring to the table. We've seen that through 2 games already. We've seen this defensive line shine in certain spots, but then also miss run fits and do different things like that over the first couple of games that I think you've had 2 weeks to get those sort of things right. Show that this week. Show that going into this Ohio State game, where they have a bye, by the way. So they're going to be watching this very closely. Find ways to assert your physicality and assert your dominance and say, we are certainly ready to take that step forward this season. And when Ohio State comes to town for a 12:30 kickoff, by the way, if you haven't heard, we are going to be ready to deal with the physicality of that unit.
Absolutely. By the way, shout out for that 12:30 kickoff, man.
Oh, I can't wait.
Beautiful. Oh my God. That tells you you're no longer in the Pac-12. But with that being said, yeah, I mean, everything is there. It's just a matter, and I just think it's going to be funny to watch Ryan Day. Imagine Ryan Day watching a game at Martin Stadium. Like, I don't think Ohio State's ever played at Martin Stadium. Anyways, beside the point, just this is the game where you also coming off a week where you had the opportunity to get healthy, get right, prepare mentally for this game where, yeah, you should win handily. But we've seen this game a couple, different times over the years. Rivalry games mean something different. And so, Jed doesn't want to become Tyrone Willingham. Time to prove it.
No, I love where you're going with that. And let's just shift this conversation because we need to talk about pass rushers, but we're going to do that from the high school level. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time and in just a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. One of the best things about the app is it makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Lars, as all the everydayers know, we started yesterday's show with a conversation about the disaster that is UCLA football right now, and all of these recruits that are decommitting left and right. We mentioned a trio of guys that Washington has offers to and had set up official visits with, in David Schwartzel, Anthony Jones, and Ramzak Fruean. We're going to talk about Ramzak Fruean a little bit later on, but one guy who I don't want to say declined to mention. I think we just wanted to focus on those guys because they're the West Coasters, just a little bit higher chances, in our opinion, to end up at Washington, who our good buddy Scott Eklund mentioned over at dogman.com that Washington also does have an offer out to and seems to be very interested in is a 3-star defensive lineman, edge rusher, depending on where you look at for his listing, Yahya Gaad from Tennessee. This is a guy I was really intrigued by when this offer went out a while back, and seeing him circle back around on Washington is a really good sign because this is an interesting high effort edge rusher kind of guy, one of those high motor players who I think if he winds up playing some snaps for you on the interior, he's listed 6'5", 260 pounds. I think that's great. But also when you look at the mold of some of these other edge rushers, I think the best comp that you can give for him on the roster right now is Jacob Lane. I think that that's something where if you're able to add a guy like that, where especially when you go and look at his offer list, that's a big win for this coaching staff.
Yeah, as you were saying that, if I recall correctly, I think Jason Capusi made a couple trips out to Tennessee in January to see him, or at least in the spring when the coaches were able to get out on the recruiting show. And I think that shows you where Washington is willing to go where the talent is, but also where the relationships are, where the energy is being invested. You got Caleb Smith from Alabama. So you got, Raiden from Florida. I know he's originally from Arizona, but they're willing to go national. Derek Zammit from New Jersey. You're going to go find some guys. And I like it. I think it's a guy that is worth at least considering, a guy that you can see, give yourself an option because, by the way, you only have 3 defensive line commits. And you're not necessarily in the position. Beggars can't be choosers here. And UW's not a beggar right now. But like I'd always been talking about, you're going to have some flip potential candidates just because that's how the numbers broke down. It is a little interesting, though, when you kind of just take a step back and all these guys committed to UCLA. Again, yesterday's guys, a little bit different cases, a little different scenarios here. But I think it's worth noting that this is why you build the relationships and trust your process and trust your evaluations where the coaching staff like these guys. It's just a matter of right time, right fit. And I think the case of from Tennessee, why not at least get him back on campus or see if he is willing to come out for a game day visit? Because I don't think you want to drag this out to December, but I do think at the same point, if you have to, it's a guy that until you fill up the class, you're going to be willing to take.
So I see where you're going with that. I think one thing that I would interject and say might be a little bit different is you don't even need to just bring him out for a game day visit. Like Ramzak Fruean, you can invite him for an official visit. There are different ways you can make this work where obviously, again, if you go look at his offer list, there are some big time programs that it looks like are in the mix for him. Auburn, Florida State seem to be some of the other ones that are trending for him at this point in time. Why not invite him out on an official visit for, one of these games later in the season where depending on how his high school schedule lines up, different things like that, like the Purdue game in November, or maybe it's like Illinois in late October, however his schedule might work out. There are different ways that you can still sell him on the program in the biggest and best way possible. And it's one of those ones where, you say beggars can't be choosers. I don't necessarily think it's that. This is with a talent like this, where, yeah, he's a really solid player. I think that UCLA wanted him to play early, which is one of the reasons that they were able to get some of the high-end guys that they did. Where at Washington, maybe you find a way to get him on the field for a couple of games, a lot like we've seen Devin Hyde, who I don't think is going to wind up redshirting when you listen to Jed Fish talk about him. But I think that with a guy like Yahya, you can find a way to get him integrated early on the edge, maybe move him to the interior as he continues to grow and add weight to his frame throughout his college career. But this is what we've been talking about for this entire recruiting cycle. It's just stacking the defensive line with bodies, and having the high-end bodies of the Derek Coleman-Brusa and T.I.U. Mukaisis of the world is amazing and awesome, and exactly what you want to see as you continue to build a Big Ten recruiting class. But having a guy like Yahya from Tennessee, from just that area of the country, and playing that position at such a high level already, especially when you go turn on his film, he's a really good athlete for that size. There's a lot to like about what he brings to the table. So I think that as this recruiting process just continues to progress, he's certainly a name that I'm going to be keeping an eye on.
No. I mean, I think it's just who ends up taking those spots. Where do you see it? And I think one thing you're kind of hitting on, maybe just not saying exactly, is the position versatility. And that's kind of, it seems to be almost a hallmark of Ryan Walters' defense, where
it is, yeah.
No matter what position group you're talking about, secondary linebackers and defensive line, you want guys that are interchangeable, because what's important in the Big Ten? Making sure you don't necessarily have to rotate guys during the drive. You can rotate drive by drive. That's different. But a lot of those sub packages where teams want to stay on the field and you don't have the chance to sub out your personnel, you need to be able to have guys that can play inside 3-5 and make that work without suffering in the long term. And I think this would be an example of, let's see which position he ends up at. Like, there's a couple of guys in the 26 class that you're saying, hey, maybe he could play here, maybe he could play here. We don't care where he plays. We like the overall talent, which is kind of the theme of Washington staff with Matt Doherty and company. They evaluate overall talent and don't peg a guy to say, hey, you have to play here. We just know you can, but we just want to see what happens when you get here.
So you're giving me the perfect layup here to talk about Ramzak Fruean, but I can't for like 30 seconds. One of the reasons, because I hear what you're saying when you talk about positional versatility, and I do believe that that's something that we might see with Yahya, just under this conversation saying he ends up at Washington. But you look at what this class needs right now, and it's a true edge outside linebacker kind of guy. I don't know if he's necessarily, at 6'5", 260, what somebody would normally picture as that true just outside edge rusher, where again, you look at his frame and there's just so much room to add weight that, yeah, maybe he does end up inside. But that's just kind of why I'm talking about him in this light, because that's the one thing this class is missing. Yes, Derek Coleman-Brusa is listed as an edge rusher, but Derek Coleman-Brusa is also 6'6" and 275 pounds with a lot of room to add weight to his frame, as you and I got to see in July and August when he came out to a couple of practices to watch his brother for an unofficial visit. Like, there is still so much room to add weight to that dude. And again, like, with a guy like Yahya, if he does add like all that weight to his frame and ends up on the interior long-term, great. As you said, whatever position you think he ends up, or you think he projects out to, if you're Matt Doherty, Jason Kafusi, Aaron Van Horn, whoever, great. Okay. You just want to get that body in the room and figure it out from there. And you can say the exact same thing with a guy like Ramzak Fruean, who I wrote about him over on Huskies Wire, where he's listed a lot as a linebacker and is a very similar player in terms of what he brings to the table as 3-star commit Isaiah Tokyo right now. But at the same point, I think Ramzak, who's lined up at safety for Bethel High School, just lines up literally all over the defense. He is the guy that you're looking for in terms of a true outside linebacker future, where you look at what he does in coverage in high school, and he's just is such a fluid athlete. And just like Yahya, there's so much room to add weight to his frame. If you want to just start him as a just tweener linebacker, a lot like what Zadris Reine-Saleh is going to be, where he can, I call Zadris a tweener because he's strong and fast enough to play outside if need be, but he also has the range and tackling ability to play inside linebacker if you want him to. So however that works out for you long-term, you're more than happy with what that looks like. And that's how I feel about Ramzak Fruean. And I have just since I started watching his film when they offered him back in January, February, where a guy 6'4", 215 pounds, that is that explosive and tackles that way and moves that way in coverage. You just find a way to get him in the building. You look at what Zach Durfee has done early on, where Ryan Walters has put him into coverage a lot through the first couple of weeks. I feel like with a guy like Ramzak, he's perfect for that sort of role of, yeah, of course you want him to rush the passer and hit home and collapse the pocket and do all these different things. But at a certain point, you need to just vary your looks and do things a little bit differently. And he is the perfect guy to just line up all over the formation and just do things a little bit differently. And do you have room for 2 true inside linebackers in this class? Not really, when you look at the 2025 class. But if you just take a guy like this and say, all right, we want you to bulk up to get 230, 235 pounds, whatever it is, great. You're happy with that. And then you just see how that plays at different spots in the spring and in the fall, and you go from there.
As you're making all those good points, then the comparison, and it's a little bit of a stretch, but the front 7 version of Taylor Rapp, the guy that you can plug and play, and just a great tackler, great football player, high football IQ player that you can line up pretty much anywhere. And with that size, you can do so many different things. Again, that's why this coaching staff doesn't necessarily peg or pigeonhole guys into saying you are going to be this player. Now, by the way, if you're really good, and you excel, that's great. No doubt about it. But they want that position option because you can kind of see where Ryan Walters might want, Isaiah Tokyo inside and Ramzak outside, or Zadrius inside, Donovan Robinson out, inside. That type of situation where you give yourself the option to where 18, 24 months down the line, you're not having to dive back in the portal for 3 linebackers because we got nothing. And so I think that's why you're in the position that you're in, where, yeah, the depth long-term might be a little thin, but the talent is there. And I think when you look at Ramzak, if you can add him to the class, who cares where he plays?
And that's my thing, to just kind of close this up here. That's exactly what it is for me. This level of athlete, I don't want to say he's like a super duper rare athlete, because we've seen those in terms of just like long speed and different things like that. But he is not too far behind that. There's just so much that he brings to the table, the way he flies the football, and does so many other things that are just truly high end. And you want to bet on those kinds of traits all day long. And especially at a position like outside linebacker, where you're going to ask him to get after the quarterback so much. That is where those traits will play the best. And I'm just curious to see how this is going to play out, because I think Washington has a really good shot to land commitments from all 4 of these guys that we've mentioned over the last couple of days. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.